In this video, I'll show you how I use the whip shading technique, how I make my gray wash, all filmed with a macro lens with double magnification. Shading is my favorite discipline, and with the technique I'll show you today, I've done many tattoos. Since this is a video for beginners, I'll show you each step of the process. First, I clean the fake skin with skin disinfectant. To attach the stencil, I use stencil stuff. Apply a bit to your finger and spread it evenly. Position the stencil. Oh, it slipped. Well, that can happen. Let's try again. Press it evenly. Peel it off. And we have the perfect stencil. I always dry it with a hairdryer or let it dry overnight to prevent smudging. Now I take a small spatula, scoop some Vaseline, and place it next to my workspace so it's always within reach. I stick the ink caps in place with Vaseline so they don't tip over, also next to my workspace. For the gray wash, I need 4 caps. It's important to shake the ink well before use. I fill the first cap with pure black. The next one with 2/3 black ink. The third with 1/3, and the last with just a drop. Then I top off each with distilled water. This is how it looks. Now I wrap grip tape around the front of the machine to get a better hold while working. Everyone can make it as thick as they want. This is how mine looks. Since I'm only tattooing on fake skin, I don't completely wrap the machine. For those interested in how to properly wrap the machine, I've made a separate video, which I'll link in the video description. Since this video isn't about lines, we'll skip that part. For the first technique, I use a 13 soft edge Magnum needle. I set the needle to protrude about 1 to 2 millimeters from the needle module. Let's move on to the technique. With classic whip shading, I stretch the skin with my free hand, and as you can see here, push the machine away from me. Dip it in pure black. Now I smear some Vaseline on the back of my hand so I can reapply it during the work. No matter which spot or technique I use, I always apply a thin layer of Vaseline beforehand because it makes wiping off the ink easier, and in my opinion, it soothes the skin a bit. With a consistent motion and by varying the depth, I create a shading gradient from dark to light using only black ink. It's important to mention that fake skin absorbs ink much more poorly than real skin, but in this video, it's just about the technique. On real skin, it would result in a beautiful continuous shading. This technique is perfect for creating a sharp edge with dark shading, like in this tattoo that I did. Now let's talk about a mistake to avoid. If you don't make a consistent motion, an unwanted black spot will form at the beginning of the shading. Moving on to the next technique, pull whip shading. Again, I stretch the skin with my free hand, but here I pull the needle towards myself. I really like using this technique, and as you can see, I try to create a soft shading with a consistent motion. This technique has the advantage that it feels like you're stroking the skin, so you can tattoo the same spot more often. I like using this technique for light backgrounds, and you can create beautifully soft shadings with a large soft edge Magnum needle, as shown in this picture. The downside of this technique, in my opinion, is that you can't work well at the edge. I have to admit I overdid it a bit in this example, but you know what I mean. Now I want to show you how different needle types produce different shadings, which I believe is extremely important to understand. With a soft edge Magnum. The shadings are relatively wide but super soft at the edges, which is why it's called a soft edge needle, as the name suggests. Next, I'll show you the shading with a round shader needle. As you can see very well here, the individual needles are farther apart than, for example, with a round liner needle. With this needle, you can also create very fine shadings, and I use it, for instance, when a Magnum is too thick and a liner is too thin. Now let's move on to the round liner needle. With it, you can create super fine detailed shadings, and I love using it to shade the details in, for example, a realistic portrait in the face, or for very small tattoos with fine details, such as this rose, which I shaded exclusively with a round liner. I was about to explain to you how to make a gradient, but I already tattooed it and forgot to press record, so let's do it again. For the lower part of the gradient, I use pure black. You can perfectly combine the two techniques of push and pull whip shading. So we can leave the lower part as it is. It looks quite good. For the upper part, I use a medium gray tone and apply the pull whip shading technique. Before I continue with the next tip, I want to thank my new channel members. Your support makes it more enjoyable for me to continue making such elaborate videos for you. Also, thanks to everyone who has subscribed to my channel. For tattoo artists with a lot of practice, it's no problem to work directly from the edge with the push whip shading technique. However, I would only recommend this if you have a lot of practice. I'll show you now how to solve it differently and still achieve a perfect result. Here we do exactly the same, but we leave a little distance from the edge. Then I take a thin needle and fill in the gap. This way we can also achieve a perfect result, as you can see here. Let's move on to the last tip I want to give you, which is the choice of needle you use. I have often noticed that tattoo beginners often make the mistake of choosing needles that are too thin when working on large areas. Many people think they will achieve a more precise result with a thinner needle, but working with wider needles is much easier. To demonstrate this to you, I use a 48 soft edge Magnum, which actually seems completely exaggerated. Don't be intimidated by large needles. You can create super soft and beautiful shadings with them, as you can see here. I know how challenging it can be to establish yourself in the tattoo industry. Many of you dream of becoming successful tattoo artists, but the reality can sometimes be discouraging. Perhaps you are struggling to find an apprenticeship or feel overwhelmed by expectations and pressure. I understand this because I have been down this path myself. It's not always easy to find your own style and stand out against the competition. Sometimes it feels like you're fighting an insurmountable mountain. But I want to encourage you, don't give up. Each of us has gone through these phases. Doubts and uncertainties are normal, but they do not define your worth or potential. Remember why you started tattooing. The passion, the creativity, and the joy you feel when you bring your art to other people's skin are worth it. Take the time to improve your skills and be patient with yourself. Every little improvement, every progress counts and brings you closer to your goal. You are not alone on this journey. We all have our struggles, but together we can overcome these obstacles. Believe in yourself and keep going. Your hard work will pay off.